It was one of those rare, perfect evenings, the kind where the air is crisp but not too cold, and the world around you feels at peace. I had just stepped outside for a quiet walk, soaking in the last hues of the sunset. The neighborhood was calm, the faint hum of distant traffic barely audible. It felt like the kind of moment where nothing could go wrong. I wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, just strolling down the sidewalk, enjoying the solitude. A few houses down, someone was barbecuing, the scent of grilled meat drifting through the air. Further ahead, a couple walked their dog, lost in quiet conversation. It was a typical evening in the neighborhood, until it wasn't. I first noticed him out of the corner of my eye, a man in a security uniform standing near the entrance of a gated community just up the street. At first, I didn't think much of it. HOA security was common around here, though I had never personally interacted with them, but something about the way he was watching me made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. His stance was rigid, his gaze fixed. I kept walking, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just doing his job. But then, just as I passed the gate, he stepped forward, fast and deliberate, blocking my path. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice flat but firm. "You're not allowed to be here." I blinked, taken aback. Not allowed? I wasn't even inside the gated area. I was on the public sidewalk. I forced a polite smile. "I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm just out for a walk." His expression didn't change. "This is private property. I need you to leave immediately." Now a prickle of annoyance joined my confusion. "I'm on the sidewalk." I pointed. "Out. Pretty sure that's public property." He didn't budge. If anything, his stance became more aggressive, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. "I don't think you understand," he said. "We've had complaints about trespassers. If you don't leave now, I'll have to take further action." The casual, peaceful evening I had been enjoying just moments ago had completely shattered. Who was this guy? Why was he acting like he had authority over a public space? My gut told me something wasn't right, but I didn't know just how deep this rabbit hole would go. Yet. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. It really helps out the channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Alright? Let's keep going. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at him. His uniform looked official enough. Dark, blue with a badge on the chest, but something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he squared his shoulders, like he was trying too hard to project authority. Or maybe it was how his eyes flickered, as if he wasn't expecting me to push back. I forced myself to stay calm. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just walking on a public sidewalk. Last I checked, that's not a crime." His lips pressed into a thin line. "This area is under HOA jurisdiction," he said, his voice clipped. "We have rules against non-residents wandering around." I almost laughed. "Wandering around? So you're telling me I can't walk past a neighborhood that I don't live in?" I asked, crossing my arms. "That's correct," he said, his tone sharp. "And if you don't leave now, I'll have to escalate this." There it was again, that vague threat. Escalate to what? Call the police? Issue a citation? Something about his wording made my gut tighten. It wasn't just the overreach of power. It was the confidence in which he delivered it, as if he was used to people backing down. But I wasn't about to back down. "Let's be clear," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "You're saying this sidewalk is private property?" For a fraction of a second he hesitated. It was quick. So quick I almost missed it. But it was there. "This entire area falls under HOA enforcement," he said, dodging the question. "We've had reports of suspicious individuals, and I have the authority to remove anyone who doesn't belong." There it was. Suspicious individuals. I felt my hands clench at my sides. Suspicious. Huh? And what exactly makes me suspicious? His expression stayed neutral, but there was something in his eyes now, like he was realizing he might have said too much. "I don't make the rules," he muttered. I just enforce them. Funny, I shot back, because I don't think this is actually a rule. He shifted on his feet. Sir, I need you to leave now. Or what? I asked, my voice sharper now. What exactly are you going to do? Call the police? Because I'd love to hear you explain to them why you're harassing someone on a public sidewalk. His jaw twitched. He hadn't expected me to push back this hard. For a second, the tension hung heavy between us. A part of me wondered if I was making a mistake. What if he really did have authority here? What if I was wrong? But no. There was no way an HOA could just decide to claim public space as their own. And yet, something about the way he stood there, unmoving, made me uneasy. Then, just when I thought the standoff might end, he reached for his radio. I've got a non-compliant individual, he said into it, his eyes still locked on mine. We're requesting backup. Backup? A chill ran down my spine. What the hell was going on here? The second he reached for his radio, my pulse spiked. Backup? Who the hell did this guy think he was? This wasn't some high-security facility, it was a quiet suburban street. And yet, he was acting like I was a wanted criminal. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Backup? Really? I scoffed. For what, exactly? Walking? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept his radio close to his mouth, waiting. But nothing came through. No response. Just an empty silence that stretched a little too long. That was the first real crack in his act. I narrowed my eyes. So, what happens now? I asked. You gonna arrest me for breathing in HOA air? He shot me a sharp glare. I suggest you leave before this gets worse for you. I let out a dry laugh. Worse? Worse how? Because so far all I see is some guy in a uniform trying to bully people off a public sidewalk. His jaw tightened. Sir, I don't have to explain myself to you. But you do, actually, I countered. If you're claiming to have authority here, I'd love to know exactly what that authority is, because last I checked, an HOA doesn't own the sidewalk. Again, hesitation. It was quick, but it was there. His confidence was slipping. I pressed on. Who do you even work for? The HOA? Private security? Because I don't see any identification, and you haven't given me a single legal reason why I need to leave. A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance? Doubt? He shifted on his feet. I don't have time for this, he muttered, adjusting the radio on his shoulder. Yeah, I bet you don't, I said. Because nothing you're saying makes any sense. The tension between us grew heavier. I could feel it, that slow creeping realization that something was wrong here. The way he avoided answering direct questions, the way his radio stayed silent, the way he kept doubling down without ever citing an actual rule. And then, it hit me. Let me see your badge, I said suddenly. His expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched, just slightly, at his side. Bullshit, I said, the realization solidifying. You're not even real security, are you? His whole posture stiffened. Sir, I'm warning you. Warning me about what? I interrupted. That you're pretending to have authority you don't actually have? His eyes flickered just for a second, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Who are you, really? I demanded. Because right now you're looking less like security and more like some guy playing dress-up. His lips parted slightly like he wanted to snap back, but he didn't, because he couldn't. The pieces were falling into place now. The fake confidence, the silence on the radio, the refusal to show ID. I wasn't dealing with HOA security, I was dealing with a fraud, and the realization sent a cold shiver down my spine. For a moment, I stood there, heart pounding, staring at this so-called security guard. The way he dodged my questions, the way his radio stayed eerily silent, it all pointed to one thing. He wasn't legitimate, and yet, a small voice in my head whispered, "What if you're wrong?" I had been so sure a moment ago, but now, as he stood his ground, arms crossed, unwavering, doubts started to creep in. Could an HOA actually enforce sidewalk restrictions? Maybe there was some obscure rule I wasn't aware of. Maybe they did have the right to ask me to leave. I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. A few people were nearby, some walking dogs, others heading home from their evening strolls. I wondered how this must have looked to them. A man arguing with security. Maybe I looked like the one causing trouble. As if on cue, an older woman walking her dog slowed down near us. She gave me a wary glance, then turned to the security guard. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. The guard straightened immediately, seizing the opportunity. "Just handling a situation, ma'am," he said, voice thick with authority. "We've had reports of trespassers in the area." I felt my stomach drop. He was framing the entire situation to make me look like the problem. The woman frowned, looking me over. I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't sure who to believe, and suddenly I felt it again, that flicker of doubt. What if I really was making this a bigger deal than it needed to be? What if I was just being stubborn? I turned back to the guard. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If I'm truly not supposed to be here, show me the rule. Show me something official that says I can't walk on this sidewalk." He exhaled sharply, like he was annoyed. "Sir, I don't have time to educate you on HOA regulations." That was it. That was the moment my doubt started to dissolve. Because if he truly had authority, if there was a real rule backing him up, he would have just shown it to me. Instead, he was brushing me off. The woman still looked uncertain, but I could tell she was starting to question him too. "Well, I've lived here for 20 years, she said slowly, "and I've never heard of a rule about the sidewalks." The guard's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the situation. And just like that, my doubt was gone. I wasn't in the wrong. He was, and now I was more determined than ever to prove it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The older woman's doubt had cracked the tension, but the fake security guard still stood his ground, arms crossed, trying to hold on to whatever authority he thought he had. But now I was sure of it. He was bluffing, and I was about to call him out. "All right," I said, keeping my tone. "Even, let's settle this right now." He raised an eyebrow, but I could see the slight tension in his posture. He wasn't as confident as before. "You keep saying this is private property," I continued, "that I'm trespassing, but I did a little reading on HOA laws recently." That was a lie. I hadn't read anything before tonight, but I knew enough to fake it. And judging by his lack of real responses, I was banking on the fact that he didn't know HOA laws either. I turned to the older woman, now my unintentional witness. "Did you know," I said, loud enough for others nearby to hear, "that an HOA can't just decide a public sidewalk is theirs? If this were private property, there would be signs, there would be legal documentation, and most importantly," I turned back to him, narrowing my eyes, "an actual security force with real credentials." He scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I challenged. "Then show me your ID." He froze. There it was. The hesitation. The slip. "I don't have to show you anything," he muttered. "That's funny," I said, stepping closer. "Because real security has to carry identification, and they have to present it when asked. So either you forgot yours tonight, or—" I tilted my head. "You don't have one at all." Silence. A few people had stopped nearby, subtly watching the confrontation unfold. I could feel the shift, the energy turning against him. "You called for backup, right?" I added, gesturing to his radio. "So where are they? Who exactly are you even talking to?" He swallowed. He knew he was caught. I pulled out my phone. "Actually, let's make this simple. I'll call the real police, and they can sort this out." That did it. His entire demeanor changed. The rigid stance, the fake authority, it all crumbled. "Look, man," he muttered, suddenly much less aggressive. "This doesn't have to go that far." "Oh, but it does," I shot back, "because you tried to intimidate me and now I want to know why." He took a step back. "I was just doing my job." "No," I said coldly. "You were pretending to have a job." The tension thickened. The bystanders whispered, among themselves. The older woman, still standing nearby, shook her head in disbelief. And then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away. Not a single glance back. No further threats. Just a man who had been exposed, retreating before the situation got worse. I exhaled, adrenaline still pumping. The moment was over, but something told me this wasn't the first time he had pulled this stunt, and it probably wouldn't be the last. The moment I mentioned calling the real police, his entire demeanor shifted. The fake confidence, the forced authority, it all cracked like thin ice. For a second, he just stood there, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting between me, the older woman, and the few bystanders who had gathered. His radio, the one he had pretended to call for backup on, remained suspiciously silent. And then, he did exactly what I expected. He tried to bluff his way out. "You're making a big mistake," he snapped, his voice sharper now, more defensive than authoritative. "I do work for the HOA. You have no idea what kind of trouble you're walking into." "Then show me proof," I shot back. "Because right now, all I see is some guy in a uniform who won't show an ID, won't cite an actual rule, and keeps changing his story." He exhaled sharply, like I was the one being unreasonable. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "You do. Because if you're really security, you should have credentials. If you're really enforcing a rule, you should be able to show it, but you can't. And now a bunch of people are watching you flounder." His eyes flickered again, this time toward the bystanders. He was losing control of the situation. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice, trying a different approach. "I don't want to escalate this. Just walk away, and we can forget this happened." I let out a dry laugh. "Walk away? You stopped me, remember? I was minding my own business when you decided to play security guard on a power trip." His jaw clenched. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Neither do you," I replied smoothly, holding up my phone, "because I just started recording." "That did it." He stiffened, his whole face going pale for a split second. Then, like a cornered animal, he switched tactics again. "You know what? Fine," he snapped, stepping back. "You want to play tough? I'll call the real authorities myself. Let's see how you like that." He reached for his phone, but I saw the hesitation in his fingers. He was bluffing, because if he called the cops, he knew they'd start asking him the questions. "You go ahead and do that," I said, crossing my arms. "Tell them how you harassed someone on public property while impersonating security." He glared at me, then at the growing crowd, then at the older woman who looked thoroughly unimpressed with his antics, and then, without another word, he shoved his phone back in his pocket and turned on his heel. Just like that. No grand exit, no final threat, just a man who knew he had lost, walking away as fast as he could without outright running. I exhaled slowly, adrenaline still pulsing through me. I had won the battle, but something told me this wasn't over. I was still standing there, heart pounding, watching the fake security guard retreat when I heard the distant wail of a siren. I turned my head. Oh, this just got interesting. A patrol car rolled up, its headlights cutting through the dim evening light. A uniformed officer stepped out, scanning the scene before locking eyes with me and the so-called security guard, who had frozen mid-step. Great. Now we were really going to find out who was in the right. The officer approached, his expression unreadable. "We got a report of a disturbance," he said. "What's going on here?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the security guard, who just moments ago was panicking, suddenly flipped the switch. "Officer, I was just doing my job," he said smoothly, his voice suddenly calm, professional. "This man was loitering in an HOA-controlled area. I asked him to leave, but he became aggressive." I actually laughed. Aggressive? Me? The officer turned to me, clearly waiting for my side of the story. I held up my phone, where I still had the video recording going. "That's not what happened. This guy stopped me while I was walking on a public sidewalk. He refused to show ID, made up fake rules, and now he's lying straight to your face." The officer's gaze flickered between us, his jaw tightening. Then he turned back to the guard. "Let me see your security credentials." And there it was again. That Split-second hesitation. I don't have them on me," the guard muttered. "But I work for the HOA." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Which security company?" Silence. The tension thickened. The bystanders who had stayed to watch murmured amongst themselves. "You do realize," the officer said slowly, "that impersonating security is a crime?" The guard's face paled. I wasn't impersonating anyone. I was just—" "That's enough," the officer cut him off. "I need you to come with me." And just like that, the fake authority he had tried so hard to maintain was gone. As the officer led him toward the patrol car, I let out a slow breath, the weight of the confrontation finally settling in. I had been right all along. And now, finally, the truth had come out. After the officer placed the fake security guard in the patrol car, I stood there for a moment, watching as reality caught up with him. Gone was the bravado, the fake authority. He just looked small. The officer returned to me after a few minutes. "Turns out," he said, shaking his head, "this guy doesn't work for any security company. He's not even employed by the HOA. I wasn't surprised." "So what happens now?" "He's being detained for questioning," the officer said. "Depending on what we find, he could be facing charges for impersonation or harassment." I let out a slow breath. Unbelievable. The officer gave me a knowing look. "You'd be surprised how often this happens. Some people put on a uniform and think that's all it takes to have power over others." That part stuck with me. I'd never really thought much about HOA rules before this. They had always been an annoying but distant reality, something other people dealt with. But this whole ordeal had opened my eyes. How easy was it for someone to fake authority? All it took was a uniform, a confident tone, and enough people willing to comply without questioning it. And if I hadn't pushed back, if I had just accepted his word, he would have gotten away with it. As I walked home that night, my mind buzzed with the what-ifs. How many other people had he intimidated before me? Had he harassed elderly residents? Bullied kids? Would he have kept doing it if no one had challenged him? I didn't have all the answers. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just some weird misunderstanding. It was a lesson. A lesson in questioning authority, in knowing your rights, and most importantly, never letting someone's uniform dictate what you know to be true. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support means the world.